Welcome back to Crime Time, Inc. Today we're examining the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy.
A tragic event that continues to generate debate even today.
Absolutely, a case that
Yeah.
shocked the nation and still has people asking questions. And we've got a lot to unpack, tons of material, actually.
Yeah, from official reports and biographies to firsthand accounts, we even dug up a podcast with RFK Jr. himself.
Wow, okay, so we're really going deep on this one.
We are. It's a case where, the smallest details can really matter.
Right, okay. So let's start with RFK himself, I guess. Robert F. Kennedy, was he beyond just the famous name?
Well, he was more than just a Kennedy, right? He was Attorney General under his brother, President John F. Kennedy.
Right.
And later a senator for New York. And he had a strong record, but 1968 was a tough year.
Yeah, volatile time.
A pressure cooker of a year, The Vietnam War, racial tensions, the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. just 2 months prior. I mean, stepping into that presidential race was a bold move.
It was a bold move, and so he was a prominent figure at a very volatile time. Why was his candidacy seen as both hopeful and dangerous?
You got to think about it. You've got this nation deeply divided, looking for answers. Some saw RFK as a symbol of change.
Hope.
Exactly, someone who'd bridge those divides. But that same visibility made him a target.
That makes sense. So let's talk about June 4th, 1968, the night of the assassination.
It all started as a night of celebration. Kennedy wins the California and South Dakota primaries.
Huge win.
Delivers this, victory speech at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. Around 1,800 supporters in the embassy ballroom. The energy was, just electric.
Wow, what a scene.
It was.
But, we've all heard the stories. Security wasn't exactly what it should have been.
Yeah, that's a major point of contention for a lot of people. No Secret Service protection for Kennedy.
Really, no Secret Service.
It's something unheard of for a presidential candidate today.
I can't even imagine.
Right. He was relying on a small personal security team, a former FBI agent, and 2 unofficial bodyguards.
And then there's that whole thing, the shortcut through the kitchen.
It's almost unbelievable, isn't it, how these, seemingly insignificant decisions can have such massive consequences.
It's true. It's those little things.
So instead of going straight to the press area, Kennedy decides to cut through the hotel kitchen, shaping hands with staff along the way.
I can picture it.
It's there he encounters Sirhan Sirhan.
So let's talk about Sirhan Sirhan for a minute. He was a Palestinian with strong anti-Zionist views.
And he was very vocal about them.
He was. Now, where did that hatred for Israel stem from?
Well, it all goes back to his childhood, a traumatic childhood in Jerusalem during the 1948 Arab-Israeli War.
A really tumultuous period.
It was. Witnessing that conflict firsthand really shaped his worldview. He immigrated to the U.S. with his family, but reportedly struggled to adapt.
So you have that resentment building.
Exactly. And then Kennedy's pro-Israel stance. It just fueled those feelings, It was like adding fuel to the fire.
I see. It was a personal thing for him.
It was. Kennedy's support for Israel was well documented, and Sirhan saw it as a betrayal, a direct affront to his beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
And that anger, it festered and led to violence.
And what about the shooting itself? What were the specifics? I mean, paint us a picture of that kitchen that night.
Okay, picture this. A crowded, narrow corridor. Kennedy's surrounded by people, completely caught off guard, and then Sirhan, armed with this .22 caliber pistol, rushes towards Kennedy.
Oh, wow.
And fires, point-blank range.
And wasn't it more than just Kennedy who was hit?
Yeah, you're right. 5 other people were injured in the chaos.
It's a reminder of how indiscriminate these acts of violence can be.
Absolutely. Tragic. You look at the photographs from that night, and they really capture the frenzy, the blood stains on Kennedy's white shirt, the expressions of horror on the faces of those nearby.
Powerful images.
They are. It was a night of stark contrasts. I mean, think about it. ABC News was signing off their election night coverage as this shooting was happening. So the nation went to bed celebrating a Kennedy victory, only to wake up to this horrific news.
The whiplash.
It was. Morning broadcasts were dominated by the shooting. Everyone was glued to their TVs for updates. It was, collective trauma, a nation holding its breath.
Waiting to see what would happen.
Exactly. And Kennedy, he was rushed to the hospital, but
it's too late.
He was in critical condition. Transported first to Central Receiving Hospital, then to Good Samaritan for emergency surgery. The most serious wound was a close-range shot behind his right ear.
That's what I'd read.
And despite the best efforts of the medical team, his condition just worsened throughout the day. His wife, Ethel, who was pregnant at the time, Stayed by his side the entire time.
I can't even imagine.
It's a heart-wrenching image, isn't it? This young family, so full of potential, and then this act of violence just tears them apart. And after almost 25 hours, at 1:44 a.m. on June 6th, Robert F. Kennedy was pronounced dead.
Just devastating. And his death, of course, had these far-reaching implications.
It did. It completely changed the 1968 presidential election. The Democratic Party was left without a clear frontrunner. It was a huge loss, not just for his family and supporters, but for a nation that was, yearning for the kind of change he represented. I mean, the funeral itself was this, powerful event,
Yeah.
a real expression of national grief.
I've read about it. People described it as just this massive outpouring of mourning. What were some of the key moments?
Well, thousands and thousands lined up in New York to pay their respects at St. Patrick's Cathedral.
I bet.
His brother, Senator Ted Kennedy, delivered this eulogy. It's still resonates today. He talked about Robert's dedication to justice, his compassion for those less fortunate, his unwavering beliefs in a better future for America.
I think I read somewhere Ted Kennedy said something about how Robert didn't need to be, idealized in death.
Yeah, he actually said, "My brother need not be idealized or enlarged in death beyond what he was in life, to be remembered simply as a good and decent man who saw wrong and tried to right it, saw suffering and tried to heal it, saw war and tried to stop it."
Wow.
It was really powerful.
Yeah, I can see why that resonated with so many people.
It really captured the essence of RFK.
Okay, so after the funeral in New York, his body was transported to Washington, D.C. for burial, right? And that train journey itself was a huge event.
It was more than just a train ride. It was like a pilgrimage.
Wow.
Over 2 million people lined the tracks.
2 million.
Some standing for hours just to get a glimpse of the train carrying his casket. It really speaks volumes about the hope he inspired and the void his death left behind. And there's one detail about that train journey that's particularly poignant.
Okay, I'm curious. What's that?
The train made a deliberate stop at Resurrection City.
Resurrection City. Refresh my memory.
It was this shanty town built on the National Mall by the Poor People's Campaign. They were advocating for economic justice, a cause that RFK strongly supported.
Right, I remember now. So the train stopping there was a symbol, like a powerful symbol of Kennedy's commitment to social justice.
Absolutely, yeah. Residents of Resurrection City joined the mourners, sang the Battle Hymn of the Republic. It was very moving.
That must have been something to see.
It was a tribute, a reminder of Kennedy's dedication to those who were marginalized, those who were struggling.
And then finally, RFK was laid to rest at Arlington National Cemetery near his brother, President John F. Kennedy.
Another tragic chapter in the Kennedy family saga, a stark reminder of the losses they endured. And it was the first burial ever to take place there at night. Very somber, fitting, considering the circumstances of his life and death.
So while the nation was in mourning, the investigation into the assassination was already underway. The focus, of course, shifted to the perpetrator, Sirhan Sirhan. You mentioned earlier his traumatic childhood, but what about the details of his life leading up to that night?
Well, he was born in Jerusalem in 44, right in the middle of a really turbulent period. His family's home was destroyed during the fighting. They were forced to flee. So he witnessed violence and displacement at a very young age.
I can see how that would shape someone's worldview.
It did. It deeply impacted him. His family eventually emigrated to the U.S., hoping for a better life.
Fresh start.
Yeah, but things didn't exactly go smoothly for him here.
What happened?
He struggled to adjust to life in a new country. His resentment towards the U.S. grew,
Yeah.
He saw America's support for Israel as taking sides against his people. It just added to the anger he already felt.
And that resentment, combined with his strong anti-Zionist views, became fixated on Robert Kennedy.
Right. He saw Kennedy's outspoken support for Israel as a personal betrayal.
So we're not just talking about some general disapproval.
No, not at all. Investigators actually found entries in Sirhan's diary expressing a growing obsession with Kennedy. He even set a deadline to assassinate him June 5th,
June 5th.
the anniversary of the Six-Day War.
So this wasn't just some, impulsive act of violence. This was premeditated.
Absolutely. Driven by this dangerous mix of political ideology and personal rage,
And to make it even more unsettling, didn't Sirhan have something on him when he was arrested?
Oh, yeah. He had this newspaper clipping in his pocket detailing Kennedy's support for Israel.
Wow, that's chilling.
It was a real, tangible sign of his fixation.
The motive seemed, at least on the surface, pretty clear-cut.
It did.
But despite this seemingly clear motive, there were still a lot of questions surrounding Sirhan and his actions that night. His accounts of the shooting itself have been inconsistent.
Oh, yeah, they have. Both during the trial and in the years that followed, Sirhan has claimed to have absolutely no memory of the events at the Ambassador Hotel.
No memory.
He says he doesn't remember firing the shots, doesn't remember the chaos, nothing.
That lack of memory, I mean, it's fueled a lot of speculation.
It has. Some people believe that he was genuinely in a dissociative state, perhaps triggered by the stress and emotional intensity of the situation.
Oh, yeah.
Others question whether the memory loss is, a convenient way to distance himself from the crime.
A way to cope, maybe?
Could be. And then there's the question of his mental state at the time.
His mental state.
Sirhan's lawyers have presented various theories over the years, including the, Manchurian candidate scenario.
I've heard of that.
Yeah, suggesting he was hypnotized and programmed to carry out the assassination.
That's a wild theory.
It is, but it kind of plays into the distrust of government agencies and the fear of mind control that was prevalent during that time.
So was Sirhan a cold-blooded killer driven by political hatred, or a troubled individual caught up in something beyond his control? Was he acting alone, or was he part of something bigger?
It's hard to say. The case, it really remains shrouded in ambiguity.
And that ambiguity was only amplified by the trial itself.
Yeah.
What happened during the trial?
Well, it started in 1969. The prosecution presented this, straightforward case, arguing that he acted alone, motivated by his hatred of Israel and Kennedy's support for the country. They presented witnesses, the diary entries, the newspaper clipping found on Sirhan, all as evidence of premeditation and intent.
And what about the defense? What was their strategy?
They focused on Sirhan's mental state, arguing that he wasn't in control of his actions that night. They highlighted his troubled childhood, struggles with mental health, and his claims of memory loss, suggesting that he was not capable of forming the intent required for first-degree murder.
So it was a battle of narratives.
It was, both sides presenting very different interpretations of Sirhan Sirhan and his actions.
What was the outcome of all of this?
Well, the jury ultimately found Sirhan guilty of murder and sentenced him to death. But that sentence was later commuted to life in prison when California abolished the death penalty in 1972. He remains incarcerated today despite numerous parole hearings.
And I imagine the debate surrounding Sirhan continues even now.
Oh, it definitely does. Even some of RFK's own children have publicly questioned Sirhan's sole responsibility for their father's death.
It's interesting.
It is, isn't it? Their statements, combined with those inconsistencies we talked about and Sirhan's own claims of memory loss, it all just fuels the fire of those conspiracy theories.
Okay, so let's talk about those conspiracy theories. I mean, this case, it's like a breeding ground for them, right?
Well, yeah, it makes sense. You've got a high-profile figure like Robert Kennedy, a family steeped in both power and tragedy, and then this seemingly straightforward assassination with all these, lingering questions.
It's hard to ignore.
It is, so it's understandable why people speculate.
So where do we even begin? There are so many theories out there.
Well, we could start with the most persistent one, the second gunman theory.
Okay, the second gunman theory, that's the one that says Sirhan wasn't acting alone, right?
Exactly. The idea is that someone else actually fired the fatal shot.
And what evidence is there to support that?
It all comes down to the autopsy report. It indicates that Kennedy was shot at close range behind his right ear. But some witnesses claim Sirhan was always in front of Kennedy. So if he couldn't have fired that shot, there had to be someone else.
Makes sense.
And proponents of this theory also point to witness testimonies that suggest more shots were fired than Sirhan's gun could hold. He had 8 rounds, but some reports say there were as many as 13 shots fired.
That doesn't add up.
It doesn't. And then there's the matter of those bullet holes allegedly found in door frames at the crime scene. They suggest a trajectory of fire that doesn't align with Sirhan's position.
But, I mean, hasn't this been investigated?
Multiple times, yeah. The FBI concluded that all the bullets that hit Kennedy and the other victims, they all came from Sirhan's gun.
So, case closed.
Not for everyone. A lot of people still question those findings.
What do they say?
Well, they point to the fact that some evidence, like those door frames with the alleged bullet holes, was reportedly destroyed.
Convenient.
It's that kind of lack of transparency that really fuels these conspiracy theories.
People see that and they think cover-up.
It's like a puzzle with missing pieces. People are going to try to fill those gaps, even if it means, creating their own narratives.
It's human nature.
Exactly.
Okay, what about this woman in the polka dot dress? That always seems strange to me.
Oh, yeah. She throws another wrench into the mix, for sure.
Who is she?
Well, we don't really know. Several witnesses describe this young woman in a polka dot dress acting suspiciously before and after the shooting. Some even claim they heard her shout, "We shot Kennedy," as she ran away.
Like something out of a movie?
It does, doesn't it? But despite all the accounts, she was never identified, never located.
So a ghost.
A phantom. Yeah, a real symbol of all the unanswered questions in this case.
She could have been anyone. A bystander, a witness, or even part of a larger plot. We just don't know.
We don't.
Okay, now what about the CIA? They seem to pop up in every conspiracy theory.
Well, the CIA, with their history of covert operations, especially during the Cold War, makes them an easy target for speculation.
Yeah, I guess so.
In this case, some researchers claim that RFK was a threat to certain elements within the CIA.
A threat? In what way?
Well, they point to his time as Attorney General, his crackdown on organized crime, and his alleged clashes with certain figures in the agency.
He wasn't afraid to make enemies.
He wasn't. They suggest that his actions created enemies within the intelligence community, enemies who saw his presidential ambitions as a direct threat to their power.
So they had a motive to eliminate him.
That's the theory, and it's fueled by claims that CIA operatives were actually present at the Ambassador Hotel that night.
I remember seeing something about that in a documentary. It identified 3 men in photos and videos from that night as senior CIA officers.
Yeah, but those identifications were later challenged. Evidence emerged that suggested at least 2 of the men were actually employees of a watch company. There was a convention at the hotel that same night.
That's coincidence.
Looks like it. Another dead end, unfortunately.
But even though it was debunked, the fact that it got so much attention speaks to the deep-seated distrust some people have in official narratives.
It does, and it shows how easily we can be drawn to alternative explanations when faced with uncertainty.
What about Sirhan's claims of memory loss? Does that factor into any of the conspiracy theories?
Oh, absolutely. That's where the hypno-programming theory comes in, the classic Manchurian candidate scenario. The idea that Sirhan was brainwashed, manipulated into carrying out the assassination, turned into an assassin without even being aware of his actions.
That's terrifying.
It is. Proponents of this theory point to Sirhan's seemingly, trance-like state during the shooting and his complete inability to recall the event.
But is there any actual proof?
Not really. Just like with the other theories, there's no hard evidence to back up the claim.
It seems like a lot of these theories, while compelling, they lack that one crucial piece of evidence.
They do, and that's partly what makes this whole case so frustrating.
It's so fascinating.
It's a puzzle where the pieces never quite seem to fit together perfectly.
And then you have Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who has been pretty vocal about his belief that his father's death was a conspiracy.
He's been very outspoken.
And he's not alone, right?
Not at all. Several of RFK's children have publicly questioned the official narrative. And those doubts coming from those closest to the victim, they carry a lot of weight.
Of course.
It really adds a layer of human complexity to the whole story. It's not just about evidence and theories. It's about real people, their search for answers, their need for closure.
And that need for closure, I think that's what keeps his case alive, even for all these years.
I agree. It's a story that just won't fade away.
Well, it certainly is a fascinating case, and I'm sure Simon and Tom will have a lot to say about it on their weekly review Sunday. But for now, we'll have to leave it there. Tune in tomorrow for another great true crime episode.